Rick and Morty comic issue 2. I'm reviewing these stories based off the deluxe version of the volumes. You know, the hardcover books that have 10 issues each of the comic in them. And for some reason they put all of the short stories at the end of the volume. So I'll review those short stories later. We start out with Rick and Morty being tried in time court. Scenes where the protagonists are put on trial always tend to be aggravating. But I don't mind here because these are technically villain protagonists. They're not supposed to be seen as heroes like the main characters of Sonic. So you don't feel like the civilians are betraying the hero to the world and being ungrateful. Still, I hope they keep this scene short. After a brief gag about how Rick tried to bribe the judge with Morty and he sucks at denying it, the judges find him guilty. Already? We started out and it looked like the trial was just starting because he said, "Today you stand accused of heinous crimes." And without a time skip, they're already pronounced guilty after one page of a gag. That's awesome for saving on annoying padding. Less reputable series would have based an entire story around this. I guess in time court, trials are way shorter. And it makes sense here because they already know Rick is guilty for a fact, so why waste a whole bunch of time proving it in a trial? I wish the trial of Ebony the Cat was this fast. Rick and Morty are sentenced to live the rest of their days in the Claxfire Labyrinth. And Rick looks just as horrified as Morty. The trial ends, and it's amusing that Rick responds by saying to Morty, "Maybe next time you'll flaunt the goods a little more, huh?" Like, why blame your grandson right now? That made me giggle. Then we cut back to the house, which had the Morty and Rick Inc. part of it removed, apparently. And we see that realistically Beth is mad at Jerry for selling out her son and father to the time cops, so he has to move into the basement. It's still oddly generous of her to not make him move out of the house outright. Jerry downplays what he did, calling it a little whoopsie and holding out hope that she'll forgive him, which is actually genre savvy. And even Summer says she's disappointed in him, while looking down at her phone so she doesn't care that much. That's so her. Jerry accidentally knocks some stuff over that belongs to Rick, and he looks on the bright side that he gets to make his own rules in the basement. Then we see some green liquid below him, and a yellow worm out of nowhere moves around. The prisoners are being told there's no hope of escape from the labyrinth, but Rick isn't taking things very seriously, and simply obsesses over the fact that because one of the prisoners looks handsome, he might have just been framed, being genre savvy of pop culture and applying it to real life. I like that Rick's lightening the mood and Morty's lampshading that this is serious. Rick tries to find out what he's in for and keeps making up a bunch of potential things he could have been in for instead of letting him talk, and they get dropped out of the spaceship with the rest of the prisoners. They fall into some water and emerge perfectly fine with Rick holding Morty protectively, and they run away from a giant monster that probably eats one of the prisoners. So, I guess the drop into the water didn't take into account the possibility that some of the prisoners wouldn't know how to swim. I mean, I think Morty needed saving there. Maybe they don't care whether the prisoners survive the water and they can get away with it on this planet. Also, I guess the helicopter wasn't that far above the water, because if the drop to the water was too high up, hitting the water would be like hitting concrete. Meanwhile, after Beth lampshades Jerry's lack of remorse, Summer briefly tries to reassure her mother, but then happily looks forward to turning Morty's room into a gym, and lies that just the form her grief is taking. Then instead of scolding her, Beth says she could make it a reading room instead. This makes sense because she's not the best person either, and at least one of the Beths has Morty as her least favorite child. And also, it makes perfect sense that a smart person who's an outright horse surgeon would want a reading room. Maybe Summer wants a gym because she's insecure about her weight for no reason. She's the typical valley girl, teenage high school girl. Beth naturally says she'll make the decision because she makes the house payments. Back at the labyrinth, Morty looks exhausted and complains that they've been walking for hours and everything's getting blurry. Then he looks behind him and asks why Rick is back to his old clothes and is just casually drinking from an alcohol flask. Why isn't he exhausted? He snarkily reveals as if it was obvious that he got them from one of the many hidden panels he put in when he built the labyrinth. He was prepared enough and paranoid enough to anticipate that he'd get arrested by time cops someday. So he built a dungeon and tricked the time cops into using it earlier on. This is what makes him smarter than Eggman. Out of all the engineer characters I've seen, he's the only one who seems actually smart. And this kind of thing is what makes him feel like the smartest character I've ever seen. He actually comes off like he does a lot of thinking, and naturally that thinking would lead to him preparing as well as being genre savvy. Eggman's just an idiot who happens to be able to build whatever he wants for the sake of the plot. Rick has tons of backup plans and is always one step ahead. So he built a dungeon he knew how to escape from and made sure it would be what he'd get put in, just in case he ever got arrested. It makes logical sense, so it's not cheap of the story. And if it was foreshadowed too much, it'd be too obvious. And actually there was foreshadowing, because when he was with the other prisoners, he wasn't taking their arrest seriously at all. Because he knew he would escape. And there's a rewatch bonus because it's amusing to see him look horrified at being sentenced to the prison he built, when you know that this was all part of his plan. So he was faking looking horrified to avoid suspicion. He also reveals even more foreshadowing to Morty. Clackspire Labyrinth is apparently an anagram for Rick's place. I'll just take his word for it. It's amusing how he acts like Morty should have figured it out by now, and it was so obvious, and he forgot how bad he is at things. I mean, Morty did have hours, and nothing to do but walk and all that time. But Clackspire sounds like a real name, not a jumble of letters mashed together like an anagram. And Morty complains about how Rick should have told him this earlier. That would have been comforting instead of letting him spend hours thinking it was all hopeless. Then right after Rick insulted Morty's intelligence unfairly, he immediately tries to make up for it by saying that he put clothes for him in one of the panels too. Don't worry, I put an outfit in here for you too, okay? But unfortunately that was the wrong panel. He does get his normal clothes pretty soon after this though, so apparently there was a small time skip and we didn't get told about it in a box in the corner of the panel for some reason. Rick says he knows the way out of here, and then Morty says he should slow down on the drinking. Yeah, especially since it increases the risk that he'll forget how to escape for a while. Rick tells him not to worry, and then says that he's not running out of alcohol anytime soon, immediately revealing he has tons of it in the maze. I'm definitely enjoying this. Morty wonders if they've gotten lost, saying that he remembers that rock while having a stain on his shirt and sweating after another vague time skip. I mean, you'd think they wouldn't get that lost, because the sun's always above them, so they would at least know the direction they're heading in based on where the sun is. And Rick made this maze. But he is drunk, so I guess that's it. Like, they're focusing on where they're going, not on looking up at the sun. Rick snarks at him drunk that he'd hate to see him get hurt falling off his high horse there. Morty surprisingly tries to say he didn't mean anything, and Rick disbelieves him naturally, and confusingly says that this isn't easy and what's it all for. It doesn't elaborate, since he wasn't talking about finding his way out of the maze. Then they start running from a giant monster from earlier, with Morty being so shocked that he took a while to start running, and Rick lampshaded it. Rick leads Morty into a tunnel slide as I wonder if the labyrinth was, as far as the time cops knew, an intentional quick death trap and not just a prison. Because how do they expect the prisoners to feed themselves and have water if they don't know about the secret panels, and there's no prison staff taking care of them? There doesn't even seem to be a toilet. It's the worst prison ever. So it must have been expected to just be a place to drop off prisoners to certain doom. But if that was the case, why wouldn't they have just killed them on the spot and not bothered with the prison? That'd be faster. Logically, most prisoners wouldn't survive since it's just a long maze with nothing for them. And I don't think most prisoners did because we don't see most of them anymore. They go underground to find a portal home that only has enough energy to send one person home, which is why Rick took so long to use it because he was looking for a better way. But because the monster is making it too dangerous, Rick has another one of his moments where he shows he cares about his grandson more than himself at the end of the day, because he pushes him into the portal home while leaving himself to find a way out of the maze alone. This story was about establishing a plausible reason for Rick and Morty to escape a prison, a way that wasn't a ridiculously confusing and anticlimactic Deus Ex Machina like the start of Season 3. Seriously, I hated that. How'd Rick manipulate a simulation he was inside of just by thinking? But here, Rick was prepared enough to have anticipated that he'd get caught by the time police, and tricked them into using a prison he built that had ways for him to escape it. I guess he shapeshifted and used a fake identity so they wouldn't know it was him who made it and was selling it to them. So this actually makes sense. While less well-written series would have me expecting a Deus Ex Machina to cheaply get the character out of prison, this was written more tactfully. Sure, it is technically a good thing for Rick that comes out of nowhere to the audience, But there was an attempt at foreshadowing, with Rick not taking the prison ride seriously in the name of the prison. And again, Rick's smart, so he would be that prepared. He also showed himself to be paranoid in the first issue, randomly accusing Morty of having a wire and betraying his family. So he would be paranoid enough to build this place. I don't consider it to be a Deus Ex Machina if it makes logical sense to have happened. Well, it wasn't a surprise that got revealed out of nowhere while Morty was in despair. At least they were self-aware enough to play the sudden revelation for comedy, as Morty asks him why I didn't tell him this sooner, being the audience surrogate, and Rick is completely casual about it. This is the best written excuse for a smart character escaping from a prison I've ever seen. It never occurred to me that one could actually have built the prison he'd be trapped in. That's thinking outside the box. I wish that was how Archie Robotnik escaped prison, instead of there being no explanation at all. And there's a twist at the end that makes the story longer to make up for its easiness to Rick. Because Rick can't escape just yet. So he has to send Morty home and run from a giant monster in the meantime. It tries to help with the anticlimax by having a dangerous monster chasing Rick, and having the story arc be a bit longer than just 2 issues.